I'm Shalane from TSC Tuition, and today I'll be identifying a contention and the main arguments of a persuasive article. The article starts with an anecdote about how the issue has come about. So I think there's not a lot of arguments in those opening two paragraphs. It's more of a gentle introduction, I think, into why this issue is relevant in this day and age. So I think that is more of an audience engagement sort of technique. And then she moves on to that third paragraph, as a science teacher of long experience in Australia and Britain. So there she's establishing her credentials as a professional in this field. So there, if you really had to name a technique there, I might say she cites her personal professional experience in this field, and then she moves on to a rhetorical question. How do the girls and women feel? Now, you'll notice that we don't really have a lot of main arguments or big arguments yet, and that is absolutely fine. Don't get stressed if you're looking at an article and you're reading through the first couple of paragraphs and you're like, oh my god, I can't find anything. Sometimes it happens. Just double check and make sure that there really is no arguments, that it's just opening techniques, in gentle introductions into the issue, and you'll be fine. So let's move on. Now she then talks about the specifics of what the issue is about, according to her. So she starts in that fourth paragraph. Hartzer talks about an unconscious bias in corporate institutions. Aha! Here is her first main point, that there is this unconscious bias. And then she goes on to sort of explain how that works. So it affects the types of projects that are entrusted to women. It colors decisions around promotion. And then we move on to, you don't have to go far in Australia. Now, it's quite interesting that she then moves into this very colloquial, casual sort of language by using the second person pronoun. You don't have to go far. And I think it's significant that she uses that after she's established her credentials as a science teacher of long experience in Australia and Britain. And then later on, of course, we find out that she's the principal of Canberra Girls Grammar School. I think it's significant that she alternates between, I'm a professional, listen to me, I'm an expert, and then she then goes into, but I'm also quite colloquial. I can be colloquial, very relatable. Look, I speak the same language as you do. And then we go on to able women who have been treated as second-class citizens. I think there's a couple of ways you can label that. You can either call that a cliche on it or an exaggeration, proverbial saying, all of which I think sort of makes her relatable, right? It makes her seem like she's a normal person who, uses the same kind of words as everybody else does. And then we've got more evidence about how this unconscious bias manifests itself in the world. And then we move on to a really big point, I think, when she says in the fifth paragraph, what women need, in my view, is resilience, grit, self-belief, and self-motivation to work to overcome this bias. And then she goes on to clarify how women can develop this. I believe the best start to developing this is at an all-girls school. And then she sort of explains why that is. So there, I think, is a really big argument that she makes. And then in that following paragraph, in the sixth paragraph, she then goes on to talk about how unconscious bias can manifest itself in schooling, and then she makes that justification for, well, if there's going to be unconscious bias in schooling, then what we should do is remove that unconscious bias, and the best way to do that is, of course, in an all-girls school. And then she supports that with the quote from one of the alumni from her all-girls school about how, it's done very good things for her in terms of gender equality. And then she moves on in that seventh paragraph to a very personal anecdote. On arriving in this country from Britain, I was surprised at the lack of diversity. So there she presents herself as an outsider to this issue. So she's looking at this issue not quite as an Australian, but someone who's, British, obviously. And she's presenting herself as, well, I can see this through a different lens and I can see this issue more clearly. But still, I don't think that's quite an argument that she's making. It's really sort of more of a transition from her previous point, which is what women need and how they can get it, into this new point in that 8th paragraph that there needs to be male advocacy networks. There's a lot of padding around this point because she starts up with the fact that in 2010, Elizabeth Broderick set up a male advocacy network to help combat the issue. And then we've got a bit more evidence and quotes and things like that in the next paragraph, which I think is the 9th, the one that starts with former rail industry chief executive Lance Hockridge. So that's a bit more evidence, a few more quotes to support what she's saying. And then she moves on to that next paragraph that initiatives like this are helping to generate change. So in this chunk of argument, I think the main point there is a little bit split. In the 8th paragraph, she starts with, we need male advocacy networks, and then 9, 10, in the 10th paragraph, 2 paragraphs later, she then clarifies that these initiatives are necessary because they help generate change. So she's presenting this male advocacy network solution as a solution to the problem of gender inequality and male bias. And then she moves on into the bit about Emma Watson. And there I think there's a bit to, engage the audience's interest, just to make sure that the audience is invested in continuing reading. And then she then makes herself, very interesting because she was the principal of Watson School. And then we move into the 3rd last paragraph, that last point, I think, that this advocacy from men should not be paternalistic or offering support from a position of strength to the weaker sex. So that's a clarification of her previous point that we need male advocacy networks because they help generate change. And then here's the but these male advocacy networks should not be paternalistic or be offering support from a position of strength and, which sees women as the weaker sex. And then she further clarifies that in that 2nd last paragraph, we need powerful men to use their power and influence to create systemic change. So there it's a clarification of, okay, well, we need male advocacy networks because they generate change, but this is what they shouldn't be, which is paternalistic. And the reason why we need men to create change is because they have power and influence to create systemic change. And then we move into that last paragraph, which I think is where that contention comes in. So she starts that last paragraph with, regardless of how quickly or greatly change happens, women will continue to need resilience and independence to succeed in the workplace and life. So again, that's an echo of that earlier 2nd main point where she goes, what women need, in my view, is resilience, grit, self-belief, and motivation to work to overcome this bias. And then, of course, in that previous point, she then goes on to talk about, well, the best place to do that is at an all-girls school. In that last paragraph, the contention repeats and echoes and I think mirrors that, or it further expands, I suppose, on that 2nd point that she makes, that, well, women need these qualities. And now that I've sort of established, what unconscious bias is and how men can sort of help generate change and how they can do that, the best place to start that, because it's, not quite there yet, is at an all-girls school, because now we've got a conscious bias. So that's in that last sentence there, developing these qualities in an environment with a conscious bias, such as an all-girls school. So there, I think that's really where her main contention is, that girls need to develop these qualities of resilience and independence in an environment with a conscious bias, because when they leave this environment of school, they're going to encounter unconscious bias. And so if I were going to highlight a contention, I think that would be it. Developing these qualities in an environment with a conscious bias allows female leaders of tomorrow to create a mindset of anything is possible.
I hope that was helpful. As always, subscribe, like, and keep updated with all the tips and tricks I post quite regularly. I'm based in Nunawading, so if you'd like to get some one-to-one tutoring, please contact me, or alternatively, if you'd like someone to come out to you, hopefully in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, I can also send someone out to where you are. Thanks for watching!